Hi, my name is Uldis Balodis, and I'm the current board president of the Western Institute for Endangered Language Documentation. And I'm delighted today to participate in our international workshop on fragmented languages, which is also in honor of the 10-year anniversary of our founding. And so let me just share my screen and I can tell you all about what I'll be talking about today. So, my own background as a linguist kind of goes in two different directions. On one hand, I have worked extensively with the native languages of North America. But on the other hand, and really over the last 10 years of my work as a linguist, since I finished my PhD, I have worked primarily with the Finnic languages. So the two languages I work with are Livonian, which is spoken in northwestern Latvia, and Lutsi, which is spoken in southeastern Latvia and is a variety of South Estonian, so related to languages like Vuru and Satu. But I'm also a native speaker of Latvian. And of course, Baltic languages have always interested me for that reason alone. And in some ways, they were also my kind of introduction to linguistics. When I was a child, I first got interested in looking at Old Prussian, which is the best documented Baltic language that's no longer spoken. And so my talk today kind of intersects, is basically about something that is at the point of intersection of both of these things. So on one hand, my work as a Finnic linguist, and on the other hand, my status as a native speaker of a Baltic language and someone who is an enthusiast of Baltic languages. So today I'll tell you about a Finnic mushroom I noticed growing in a Baltic forest, all linguistic metaphor here, and specifically in a extremely fragmented West Baltic language called Yatvingian. So in my talk today, first I will give you a bit of a background of Yatvingian, where it was spoken, what it's related to, and so on. And then I'll tell you a bit about the document that's basically at the center of my research for this talk, which is the Narew glossary. And it's a well, I'll talk about it in more detail, but basically it's a very unusual kind of linguistic document, but it's also quite small, and it gives sort of a very interesting picture of the world that Yatvingian speakers lived in, just based on the words that are in it. Then I'll kind of turn to the contents of the dictionary. So on one hand, looking at the diverse origins of words in it, but then on the other hand, at the phenomenon that I'm particularly interested in, which is the possible Finnic borrowings in it. And then I will focus specifically on the one that interests me the most, which is this mysterious Finnic mushroom growing in a Baltic forest that I'll tell you all about when I get there. And then I'll sort of unpack it a bit, talk about how the word I'm focusing on, which if you haven't guessed yet, is mushroom, how it compares in Yatvingian with its linguistic relatives, the Baltic languages, but also in contact languages that were spoken around it and that Yatvingian speakers would have had contact with on a regular basis. Then finally, I'll look a bit at possible explanations for this particular word occurring in the Narew glossary, ones that I've kind of come up with. And then I'll kind of rope it back to why does this matter for fragmented language studies, since the study of fragmented languages is something that we're particularly interested in at the Western Institute for Endangered Language Documentation. So first of all, the background of Yatvingian. So I made this little map here on the right, and all of the names in bold are Baltic nations or tribes. And this shows their distribution in the 9th through 13th centuries, but with modern political borders, so you can sort of see where everybody was located, as well as with major waterways, which were significant in many ways, both, as you'll see later on, with how Finnic people entered this region. And so keep an eye on the Daugava waterway there, kind of in Latvia, as well as kind of placing the location of where this dictionary was from that I'll talk about, the Narew dictionary. So basically you see there next to Yatvingians, the Narew River. That's what's being discussed. So like I said, Yatvingian is a Baltic language. So Baltic is a sub-branch of Indo-European. And traditionally, it's seen as having two branches: East, which are all the living Baltic languages, so Latvian, Lithuanian, and then depending on how you categorize them, either as languages or varieties of these other two languages, Latgalian and Samogitian. And then the West Baltic languages today, primarily, I'll just mention Yatvingian and Old Prussian. Old Prussian is the best documented West Baltic language, but also the best documented major Baltic language that's no longer spoken. So for Yatvingian, few records exist. And so I wanted to mention this fragmented languages scale here. So again, this is something we've developed at the Western Institute for Endangered Language Documentation to sort of show how a fragmented language, what materials exist for it, and the degree of work that's been done. So a fragmented language is basically one that is for which there exist only fragmentary records. So quite a few languages are this way, even ones that are fairly well documented. However, Yatvingian is not one of these languages. It's quite poorly documented. Only very fragmentary records exist. And so each of these values is on a scale of 5. Okay, so the first one is A, B, C, D, E, F, and it sort of shows how much has been published on the language. So A is the highest, F is the lowest. A includes a reference grammar, but there's no Yatvingian reference grammar. So basically I gave B because actually the existing materials have been quite thoroughly discussed in the literature. The next one is how much exists that's unpublished. In terms of written materials. And to my knowledge, I actually don't think that there is anything that hasn't really been discussed, but maybe there is, because I'm not, a Yatvingologist. So basically, I just gave it a 1, which is the second lowest value in terms of anything unpublished existing, and like written records and such. The next value is audio and video materials. Well, Yatvingian went extinct several centuries ago, so there are no audio or video materials. And the last one is basically the size of the kind of the vibrancy of the speech community or ethnic community. And there is no real Yatvingian speech community today. Kind of like my next point says, there actually is language reconstruction that has been done for Yatvingian, but also especially for Old Prussian, to the extent that there are some people today who are raising their children as speakers of a revived Prussian, Baltic Prussian. So that's kind of amazing. So on the map, you see Yatvingian spoken kind of to the south, or sort of in that region that would be extreme southern Lithuania, and then the border area between present-day Belarus and Poland. And the Yatvingians ended up in this area partially as a result of trying to move away from the Teutonic Knights and their attacks and so on. So Yatvingian, we don't know exactly when it ceased to be spoken, but it probably was somewhere in the 18th century. But what's interesting is the identity on some level must have persisted, because in a 1860 census in Grodno Governorate, and Grodno is in basically exactly that kind of border region in Belarus near Lithuania and Poland, there were still over 30,000 individuals who were listed as Yatvingians. So that's kind of fascinating. So the background of the glossary that I want to discuss today is, I'm not going to say the Polish name, but in English, it's the Pagan dialects of the Narew. So recall that the Narew River is here, kind of right there where it says Yatvingians, and it sort of goes right through this border area. In the dictionary or glossary, as I'm calling it here, you have 215 entries in a Baltic language, and these are given with their Polish translations. So the circumstances in which this dictionary was found are kind of magical. It was basically a young kind of enthusiast of languages and old manuscripts named Vyacheslav Zinov, who was from Brest in Belarus, and he was hiking through the Białowieża forest, which again, if you look on the map, is right there. It's that little kind of gray area under Yatvingians. And when he was there, he encountered a homestead in the middle of the forest in a tiny place called Novi Dvor, which is number 1 on the map there in Belarus. And the old man who lived there said that basically the book that Zinov bought, that it had originally come from Białowieża, the town of Białowieża, which is nowadays in Poland, there, number 2 on the map. So what Zinov ended up buying was actually a little prayer book, and as far as I understand, he only later on found that there was this little kind of inset, which was this Narew glossary containing these 215 words in Yatvingian. And Zinov was very interested by this, and he copied it by hand. And it's a good thing that he did, because when he had to do his obligatory military service in the Soviet army, during the time that he was away, his parents actually threw away the original manuscript containing the Narew glossary and also other manuscripts that he had. So it's extremely fortunate that he wrote down what was in this book. But in any case, once he returned, he sent his copy of the manuscript to Vilnius University in Lithuania for analysis. And initially, it was, of course, treated with just about the right degree of skepticism. I mean, what is this? Some handwritten book suddenly appears in this supposedly mysterious Baltic language. But as it turned out, ultimately, through extensive linguistic analysis, the opinion has generally been that that Zinov's handwritten copy is a handwritten copy of something that was an authentic document, just because of the sort of the idiosyncrasies of the text, the diversity of the words in it, the fact that it's just very complicated in terms of the kind of material you see, and it would be perhaps strange and odd for somebody to try to kind of fabricate that, perhaps even impossible. And even though initially there were some differing opinions on what the language was, some suggested it was maybe some kind of very Yatvingian influenced Lithuanian, or perhaps some kind of a mixed language. Nowadays, it's generally agreed that it does show some kind of Yatvingian. So looking at what's actually in the dictionary, you see that the material is of somewhat diverse origins. So first of all, what's interesting, there aren't, of course, many materials on Yatvingian at all. Recall on the fragmented languages scale value, it kind of scores quite low in basically anything that exists in it. And in fact, the only other major source of Yatvingian is quite different in its contents and the nature of their contents from this Narew glossary. And analysis of the glossary has shown that of the materials that are Baltic, about 11% of them are shared with all of Baltic. So that means Latvian, Lithuanian, Old Prussian. 7% only with Old Prussian, 20% with East Baltic, but especially Lithuanian, which of course isn't so surprising since Yatvingian was spoken directly next to Lithuanian. And then 28% are clearly Baltic in their root or their kind of structure, but don't have direct correspondences in other Baltic languages. But in this dictionary of, again, only 215 words, you see that there are also extensive borrowings. And so Lithuanian linguist Zigmas Sinkevičius, he was the one who did this initial most extensive detailed analysis of the Narew glossary and published on it. And he found, for example, 3 loans from Polish, 18 from German. But again, if you recall that it's only 215 words total, that's actually quite a few words. It's quite a large proportion. And others have also noted that the contents of the dictionary suggest perhaps that either the speaker or the person who recorded it had also had contact perhaps with Northeastern Yiddish. So now I kind of want to turn to this central point, which is Finnic borrowings. So if you look at on the right, you'll see that you'll see a map of the Finnic languages, and notice that Lithuania and Belarus barely show up at all on this map. And that's because there are no known historical or modern Finnic languages that were spoken that far south. So it would actually be quite surprising for Yatvingian to have any Finnic borrowings in it, you know. But as it turns out, pretty much right from the get-go, as soon as the contents of the dictionary became known, linguists observed that there were some words in it that actually did seem to look as if they came from some Finnic language. And I just sort of gave a few sources here from the mid-80s, pretty much immediately after the first publications on the dictionary, and then much more recently. These are all fairly detailed analyses of the possible Finnic origin of some words in there, and I've given some here. So you see va, need, wow, was, aiki, time, aiga, and then you see, and I took these from Livonian, the you know, possible correspondences in a Finnic language, and you can sort of see the similarity. But the thing is that it's not necessarily so clear if these really do come from a Finnic language or not in Yatvingian, because some of these words, like vow, was in Yatvingian, they resemble a modern Livonian, modern Finnic language, so Livonian as it is now, rather than sort of what Finnic languages were like at the time that the dictionary was recorded. And similarly, some words such as aiki, time, in the kind of corresponding words in other Finnic languages, so aiga in Livonian, aig in Estonian, aika in Finnish, are etymologically possibly themselves from Baltic. So aiki, time, could really just be a Baltic word still in Yatvingian, a Baltic language. But in any case, I'm not here to sort of really dig too deep into that. But it just should be noted that there's several different possible interpretations for some of these. So the one, though, that I think is unequivocally extremely interesting and quite likely, possibly, a Finnic borrowing is the word that shows up for mushrooms. So you see it there on the right, sini. And what's interesting about it is it doesn't resemble the appearance of the word for mushroom in any neighboring language or other contact language that Yatvingian had. But if you compare it to the way mushroom looks in Finnic languages, it's quite similar. So you see Estonian sein, Livonian saying, Finnish sieni, and it's also similar in other Finnic languages. And in Baltic, the only language that has a similar looking word is in Latvian, seine. And that's a known Finnic borrowing, likely from Livonian, possibly from Estonian, but probably Livonian. So the presence of sini, mushrooms, in Yatvingian is mysterious. So on this page and this slide, I sort of showed basically what the word for mushroom is like in other related languages in Baltic, and then in the Slavic and Germanic languages that Yatvingians would have been in contact with. And as you see, it's really not similar in any way to the words in Lithuanian. Samgidian is spoken in northwestern Lithuania, and then it's also not really similar at all to in Belarusian, Polish, where you have a word that also exists in Lithuanian, grybas, but this is a Slavic word. German, pilz, and similar terms, Yiddish, schwamm, none of them are similar. But the really sad thing is that in Old Prussian, we don't know what the word was because it was never written down. So it could be that that would be the key that would unlock this whole mystery, but we'll never know. So in any case, only in Latvian and Latgalian, spoken just in the eastern Latvia, are words that are similar to Yatvingian Sini, and they're clearly there from a Finnic borrowing. So in conclusion, I basically just wanted to give a few possible ideas about where this could all come from. So recall that Finnic peoples entered the Baltic region by following the Daugava waterway. And already then, when they were coming that way, they had extensive contact with Baltic speakers. So one possible solution is that Sini is a really ancient borrowing from a Finnic language. And it could be that it just reflects this very, very ancient contact that Baltic people in general had with Finnic speakers in many quite a long time ago. But another possibility could also be that it is a borrowing from Baltic. So again, we don't know what it was in Old Prussian, but we also don't really know what perhaps existed in some local subdialects in Lithuanian at that time. Perhaps this word that would be similar to the Finnic word for mushroom was more widespread in Baltic, and then later on was basically never documented and just disappeared due to other kinds of borrowings from other languages. So it could be that it is possibly also a Baltic borrowing, but one that there's no evidence for it being from Baltic. Then it's also possible that it could be a borrowing from an unknown Finnic population. So in this region, but north of there, so in Latvia, there are several different Finnic language islands. So there's a Vodic language island. So Vodic is also a Finnic language, but there was one in south central Latvia near the town of Bauska, and these people were called the Krevens, and they spoke their language there from the 15th through the 19th centuries, with some people still remembering fragments into the 20th century. And then there's also South Estonian language islands, Lutsi, the one I work with. Actually, behind me, the image I use, this is from the Lutsi region in eastern Latvia. So you see how lovely it is there. And Narewu in northeastern Latvia. And then also South Estonian language island in just across the border in Russia. And there were also other communities like this. So who knows, maybe there was also a unknown Finnic population living in that area near where the Yatvingians were. And then, of course, it's always possible that it's some other source or random chance that this word came to be in Yatvingian, that it actually has nothing to do with Finnic or anything else, but who can say? So finally, just a few words about why this matters to fragmented languages. So I don't have a picture of Finnic mushrooms in the Baltic forest, but I do actually have a picture that I took just last month of Finnic mushrooms in a Finnic forest. So these are in Satumaa in southeastern Estonia. And so the thing is that often, because of the fragmentary nature of the materials they contain, fragmented languages may be overlooked in favor of better documented languages, but they can still tell us so much about not only the language itself, but the world that the speakers lived in, the languages they were in contact with, their linguistic environment. So if nothing else, the Narew glossary and the presence of words like Sini and other borrowings sort of shows the diversity of the world that the Yatvingians lived in their kind of home area, the many languages they were in contact with. So again, this very fragmentary glossary does actually tell us some very interesting things about this world that these people lived in and spoke, in which they spoke their language. But also, I mean, kind of as I was sort of saying in my conclusions, this glossary and other materials of this sort can also point to the existence of unknown linguistic populations or other interesting facts about the historical situation that a community may have existed in. So on one hand, Sini may show that there there was some other Finnic population living nearby. On the other hand, it may show that the depths of Finnic Baltic contact in prehistoric times and such. So fragmented languages have a lot to offer, not just the Yatvingian, but also the study of other such languages and associated topics. But in any case, thank you so much today for listening to my talk. Sadly, I can't be here live today, but I'll be happy to answer any of your questions over email. And I wish you all a nice day. Thank you.